Patrick Hoops from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
James Walker here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Orr, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Matt Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Number 15 in the 50 most relevant is one of the absolute superstars of the AFL. And maybe for you he's a little low, but the higher we get in the list, the harder it gets. Number 15, GWS superstar Josh Kelly. Just a couple of days ago, we had my special guest on that's back again. The Phantom. Hello, mate. How are you?
Well, thank you, mate. Thanks for having me back. One of my favourites. I couldn't miss out on this one.
I know. When I'm giving you some names to talk about, there was some fights to make sure you got ahead of Josh Kelly as well. Make sure if you do play SuperCoach, whether it be the draft or the salary cap format of it, make sure you go and check out the great work he's doing at the Advertiser. Sometimes you'll see that roll through Super Footy, but make sure you go and subscribe to their podcast. Wherever you get your podcast from, just search for the Phantom's Lair and you'll be able to go and check that out. Let's talk about this GWS superstar. Still, crazily enough, just 24 years old. Feels like we've been talking about him for an absolute eternity, but he is an absolute out-and-out superstar of the competition. He just, I don't know, he doesn't really have a bad game, does he, Phantom?
He doesn't, no. And he's smooth moving, he's got class, he's in his goal kick. We know goal kicking midfielders rule, especially in SuperCoach. He's involved in a lot of giant scores. He's number one at the club for score involvements, closely with obviously Toby Green too. But whatever he does, it's good. Whatever he's involved in, it turns out to positive for the Suns. So, like I said, there's not a lot he does wrong. But then the question is, how often is he out there? That's the concern, obviously, in 2020.
That is the big concern, that as we get towards the middle part of this episode, I want to have a really good conversation with you about that. His best score last year in SuperCoach came against the Hawks. It was a 154, while in AFL Fantasy and DreamTeam, his top score was a 148 against the North Melbourne Football Club. Last year, personal best seasonal averages. It was just shy of 116 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team and 117.4 in SuperCoach. Because of that, my friend, you are going to be paying a fair bit of cash to be able to go and get this man. Just around about $637K in SuperCoach is what you're setting back. Around about $860,000 in AFL Fantasy and about $20K cheaper than that in AFL Dream Team. And Phantom, I don't know about for you, but there are certain players that when you just watch AFL across the weekend, there are certain players that you just, even though you don't support that team, you just love the way they go about it. Winning the ball on the inside and the outside, using the ball with exquisite class and poise. And for me, Josh Kelly is probably one of my favourite players in the league to watch.
I agree. I've had the same opinion for a while now. Yeah, the Phantom doesn't shy away from a bad prediction or a bad season, so I can pull up my own tyres. When I predicted that sort of breakout in 2017, it's been one of my favourites since then. And like you said, those attributes added to such a big endurance base. He's always there, gets from contest to contest. And like I said, last year played 14 home and away matches, a SuperCoach ton in 11 of them, and he goes big, 6 of them in excess of 120. But given how good he is and how important he is to the Giants, that's also the downside in terms of fantasy. Any niggle or any little problem, they're not going to risk their start. They want him ready for when at the crunch end of the year, and that's been the problem in the last couple of years. Probably touch on a little bit more, but he's missed 29 games.
Yeah.
So he's only played 29 games in the past 2 seasons.
Yeah, 29 of a possible 44. And that's probably the biggest question mark people have on him is no one doubts his fantasy football pedigree or just how elite of an AFL midfielder he is. The question is, how many games are we going to get out of him? Because you're right, we look at that SuperCoach season, and that conversion of big hundreds in DreamTeam and AFL Fantasy, very similar with that average of 115. 12 tons, 7 of them over 120. In fact, between round 9 and 15, he got 6 of those 120-plus scores in that format. Barely has a game where he drops below 100. His lowest score last year in SuperCoach was 82. In AFL Fantasy, it was 75, meaning that while he does have this really incredibly high scoring ceiling, his scoring floor or scoring basement is also not so that it burns you on the other side like a player such as a Lachie Neale who can be tagged out of a game and get you a 50 or a 60. We don't see that with Josh Kelly. I guess, is he almost untaggable, Phantom?
I think so. Again, it goes back to that endurance base and what such a terrific athlete he is. No one can keep up with him. And then again, he's so smart when he's not on the move that he's always 1 or 2 steps ahead of that opposition attention, and he's so calm and composed with the ball in hand. He's we say it all the time, like a Scott Pendlebury, Marcus Bontempelli, they have a little bit more time, or they seem to have a little bit more time than most other AFL players. He is one of them. He's always 1 step ahead. I'd hate to be chasing him around an oval at all.
He's one of those guys, you're right, that when he gets on a scoring run, not only does he hit hundreds, but big hundreds and big hundreds. I remember back to 2018 where almost every week he was pumping out 130-plus scores in SuperCoach. Just looking back in round 18 to 20, 21 that year, it was like 130. That huge 205 that was a career best score from him.
I forget that one.
Yeah, it's not often we get a midfielder that can go 200, like we're talking Dunkley, Dangerfield, and Kelly. I think they're the only 3 we've got. I'm sure someone will tweet me when I'm wrong, but I feel like they're the only current midfielders we have that have hit that 200 marker.
And it's just what he does with the ball and what he creates. If Patrick Dangerfield had the class and the finishing skills of a Josh Kelly, his scores would be even through the roof. We talked about him the other day, but again, he's so damaging forward to centre for the Giants and on the scoreboard himself. Couple that with his ball-winning ability everywhere else on the ground, you've almost got the perfect SuperCoach scorer.
Yeah, look, I love him as a player in all formats of the game. He's got ceiling, he's got high 100 frequency, not just last year, but over the past few seasons, really, since he did have that breakout season back just a couple of years ago. And his scoring floor is not so that it will hurt you. And what I find most intriguing about GWS and Josh Kelly this year, I suppose it's 2 big questions we've got is, 1, what impact do you think, Phantom, will happen supposing all the GWS midfield stars play this year? Do you see that impacting the scores of Josh Kelly?
I don't know. I don't think he's still the number 1 man in there. I know they get Callum Ward back too. Obviously, the development, another year of Tim Taranto. Canelio back from his injury, that missed the second half of the year, but I still think if he's out there, he's still going to average 115 plus. It's just, when we talk total score, how long is going to be out there for? Is it enough? We know he's been up the top 5 in both preseason 2K time trials so far, so he's tracking along nicely, but I'm still just a little bit concerned.
Yeah, and I think that the concern is valid, and that's why for me, and I know everyone chooses to play the limited trade formats of the game, totally different. But for me, when I know I've got, these 30 trades, I've got to get them through across the year. Look, different in AFL Fantasy where it's 2 trades a week, use them or lose them. But in the limited trade formats, when you're spending money on a premium, you want to make sure you're investing in a guy that, look, God willing, I suppose, he plays 22 games for the year. But that's why for me, I think if the reason you're not starting Josh Kelly is because of an injury history concern, then I don't think you can upgrade to him during the year, because that injury concern hasn't disappeared just because he's gone 7 games at over 115. Is that a philosophy you kind of buy into, Phantom, as well, of that it's either a start or pass no matter what he gets? Or is there always a reason to move around that?
It's a good question. Firstly, I'm not going to start with him, and you're probably right. He's not someone who's going to be high on my list. It's hard because he does it for 10 or 12 games in a row and you need to make your final upgrade after the bye, and he's flying, it'd be hard not to do so. But then, even if it's slightly, especially in that back half of the year when the finals are going to be so close, that's when more trouble can come. So I probably do. I can't say 100% agree with that statement, but there is definitely some merit into that, especially with him. We spoke about my 3-year analysis a couple of days ago. Patrick Dangerfield, he's got obviously 362 more points than Jack McRae at number 2. But Jack McRae, 7,476 points in the last 3 years. Josh Kelly, almost 2,000 points behind, 5,752. He's only played 50 games of a possible 66 home and away matches in the last 3 years. So, and again, with him, there's been no ACL injury or a broken leg or your contact issues. He's had hip, knee, groin issues. He's had all of it. So, yeah, there's definitely reason to take that injury history into account. It hasn't been any accidental knocks or the like.
Yeah, and the key thing is you're entering into the season. Again, everyone chooses to play it differently. Is 12 months ago, people had these massive concerns over Brad Crouch. He's never been able to put a full season together. And yet he did. 12 months prior to that, Devon Smith has never put 22 games of footy together. And yet he did. Taylor Adams, like, we can do it every year. Just because they have an injury history doesn't mean they're going to have it. All it does is you have that as a variable. You go, I know historically he's going to miss games. So if I start him or even trade him in during the year, odds suggest I'll probably have to trade him out with a longer-term injury. But it's not a reason not to pick him. It's just you've got to know that going eyes wide open in.
Absolutely, and I guess when you put him up against some of the more consistent midfielders in that price bracket who are a little bit more reliable with their body, even if Kelly's missing 2 or 3 games, maybe they're a bit cautious later in the year.
Yeah,
that creates 350 total points to your score. So it's a tough one because, as we said before, there's no better player to watch over the weekend than Josh Kelly. But I still think for me, maybe in the past I've probably overlooked some larger samples and tried to overlook the injury history a little bit more. And you're right, it doesn't mean don't pick him, but I'm going to probably go with the guys we think we can trust a little bit more this year.
Yeah, and I understand that as the reason too. Everyone chooses to set their starting squads up differently. Some just look for guys with ceiling. Others like to choose to play it safe and get guys they know that they're durable, dependable, and they'll bring some flair and fancy scoring, as the year goes on. All of those are perfectly okay. That's the beauty of these formats of the game, isn't it? Is there's no one must-have formula to go with, or even really must-have player to some extent. Is there's always unique variations of how you can get to the ultimate objective, which is to win your leagues and to get the top ranking.
Absolutely, and like I said, that's just a great thing about our game. And even on social media this morning, a lot of talk about guys who surprised about the low ownership of Josh Kelly, and they'll be jumping on board. So you're right, a lot of different opinions about him, and also might come down to what you're doing elsewhere. Are you starting injury-prone guys elsewhere? Obviously, what are you doing with Tom Mitchell in defence? Tom Duday or Dylan Robertson? Are you taking the risk there where you sort of can't afford to do it in the midfield? So, like I said, a lot of different variables comes into the equation when you're going to way up at Josh Kelly in the midfield. Yeah,
it certainly is. There is no doubt that he is one of the best scorers in the game. The question is, will he be able to do it enough for us in 2020? And that, I suppose, Phantom, is when it comes to drafts, is where it's going to be fascinating to see where people place him, because you're right, missing games can sting you in the draft formats a little bit. Where do you have him ranked in SuperCoach drafts this year?
It's a tough one. I would definitely, if I had my second pick, regardless of where it was, I think you'd probably still take him very early in the second round. Just, I know it goes against what I said about in the classic format, but I think if you locked away, say, a positional player, especially in the first round, he's probably not going to be there in the third round. So I think somewhere in the second round is about right for him. If you can be sure he played 22 games, he'd be going in the top 5.
Yeah.
We discussed with Paddy Dangerfield a couple of days ago. But that the doubt or the element of risk, I guess, with his body, based on previous data, it probably pushes him back probably about 10 spots, I reckon.
Yeah, I think so. Look, and that's where for me, and I think it's similar in the other formats of the game, is people will be turned away probably because of the game's history, but to get a guy that can average 115 with your second selection in a draft, whether that's your first midfielder because you've locked in another line or you're going for two midfielders straight out of the gate, you just can't say no to that. I think you've just got to trust your bench in that point in time too and go, look, for maybe the 3, 4, 5, 6 games he misses through the year, yep, I might drop 20-odd points a game, but he might win me 3 or 4 games just in a head-to-head matchup because of that. So trust your bench. Trust that you can pick up a late fly that absolutely crunches through, and most rounds we're going to get a decent option that we could, plug into our sides for a high 80s, 90s, and that's not going to be the difference in your midfield to cost you.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that analysis. I'll definitely have him. I think, like I said, even if you do take a midfielder with your first pick in your SuperCoach draft especially, if he's still there with your second, I think you probably just have to do it.
Yeah, I think so too, man. Hey, appreciate your thoughts today on Josh Kelly.
Mate, thank you again for having me. Lovely work as always, and looking forward to seeing the rest of the countdown unfold.
Thank you, mate. If you want to go and check out the rest of the 50 most relevant, you can go and check that out at coachespanel.tv. All the links for all of the players revealed thus far. If you're loving what you're getting from the Coaches Panel right now, you can support us on Patreon. And if you've been enjoying the work of the Phantom over the past couple of days, maybe you're just new to playing SuperCoach, it's a great piece of content and resource to get involved with. You can search for the Phantom's Lair wherever you get your podcasts. You can go and check him out at The Advertiser for all of the articles that he and the rest of the team are creating for SuperCoach. We head almost to the end of the teens of the 50 most relevant. And who will it be tomorrow?